Yeah. So it's very important that we don't endorse somebody, as everybody is saying. We have both sides there, and I've always been committed to that. The one year that Mike Garcia came as an elected official on Yom Kippur, he came to apologize for a statement that he made that he apologized to me for. And I said, it's fine for you to apologize to me, but you should apologize to everybody. And he did. And it was a statement that in the scheme of things was not as offensive as other things that people have said on both sides in the last 3 or 4 years, but he apologized for it. And that was a unique situation. And quite frankly, it made the LA Times, and the LA Times reporter, who's very liberal, who reported on it, was impressed by it. I mean, he still made digs at Congressman during his report of it, but he was impressed by it. So also happens to be Jewish, and he thought it was fitting that the person came on Yom Kippur to do it. So, people miss the point, or they see something and they get upset about it. They don't even pay attention to what's really happening. And that's part of the problem of what we're dealing with today in today's society. And unfortunately, I feel like I'm fighting in a whole nother fight, which is just to keep people to have an open mind and not to close off their ability to learn and grow and be exposed to things that might challenge them. So I don't know what to tell you other than I see it as a reflection of our community being engaged, our Jewish community, our synagogue community being engaged. And I see it as a way for us to push ourselves as individuals to make sure we listen to people and to be respectful to people. But I'm actually proving the point of why it's necessary by the reaction that some people have. So unfortunately, some people took to Facebook, and just so you know,
we agree with you. Just
I
so
know,
you know.
I know you do, and you never post on Facebook, but I had to take them down because I just didn't want people to misunderstand what was happening, and rather than respond to them, we just took down the post. So they're not there now. If you go look at the website, at the Facebook page, you won't see them. But man, I couldn't. I was like, this is exactly why we're doing this, is so that people don't get reactive. And again, with all fairness, the people who commented are either not members of the synagogue or don't come very often. They're not members at all, or nobody who's a member commented, though I did get a couple of calls from members. Nobody who commented on it. Nobody who commented on the website, on the Facebook page, was a member or was active or knows what's going on. Anyways, I shouldn't have to explain it, but I obviously I will. And by the way, I will again at high holidays when these people come and whatever. So, today, I said we have we're going to read some interesting stuff today about prayer. A couple really interesting lines today about prayer, and not only about prayer, but kind of why we pray, and I think some major theological ideas that Judaism has about human behavior and who we are as human beings, in the context of prayer, I guess, but in daily life. And then, as I mentioned, tomorrow night we'll be at Beverly Hills for the rally, and then Friday night we'll have Shabbat with Rick and Addie. So they're changing with Wendy, and then Rick and Addie will be here again on the 27th for a special Friday night service. We're adding a Slichot style Friday night service with some melodies and styles modes for the high holidays. They're going to do the Friday night, the 27th as well. So we're trying to add a few more Friday nights every month for Mike, keep Mike happy. It's the Mike service. No, I mean,
you got to keep Mike happy. If Mike's happy, we're all happy.
At least Mary's happy. Everybody's happy, but Mary is. And that's important. We want to keep Mary happy, really. So last week we started reading about Hannah's prayer. Hannah praying for a baby, for her baby, which would end up being the prophet, judge, leader, kingmaker Samuel, a very important man in Jewish history. Arguably the most important man all the way back. You have to go back about 200 years before to Moses. So you go to Moses, to Samuel, and then quite frankly to King David. who was the king, the second king that Samuel made. But Samuel's mother, Hannah, couldn't have a baby. And when she prayed to God, the way that the story is reflected at the very first chapter of Samuel, it's such an effective prayer. It's such a model for prayer that the rabbis literally look at her prayer, as we've seen last week and as we'll see this week, as how we can learn to pray from her. So interestingly, it's a woman, and it's a great example, by the way, of a woman in Jewish history and Jewish theology, Jewish texts, who sets the stage for everybody's behavior, not just women, but everybody. So when people talk about, where are important women in Jewish history or Jewish texts, Hannah is definitely one of them, who is not only, again, somebody who had an important role to play, not just because she had a baby, but because she advocated on behalf of making sure she could have a baby. And as the rabbis read in between and decompressed, there's a lot more about Hannah's prayer in the Talmud than there is in the book itself, in the book of Samuel. So there's pages and pages and pages about her prayer, and we're reading them right now. We read them last week, and we're going to finish reading them today. But they really are attached to it, and we're going to see some more important lessons. So that's where we were last week and where we are this week, and then we'll take that on. And what's the good connection to this? So this is Rosh Chodesh Elul. This is the last month of the Jewish year, right before we get to Rosh Hashanah. And 1 month from now, on Rosh Hashanah, the tradition is to read the Haftarah from Samuel, which is this story. So this is the Haftarah for Rosh Hashanah. This story from the first chapter of the first book of Samuel. Because remember, Samuel has 2 books. One that he's in, which is First Samuel, but in the second Samuel, he's gone. He's not on. Samuel's dead in the end of First Samuel. In Second Samuel, it's really Saul dies at the end of First Samuel, and in Second Samuel, it's King David doing his thing. And it's really Second Samuel, if you would call it by its thematic name, it's the book of David. It's the book of David, because at the end of Second Samuel, or let's say the beginning of the book of Kings, he dies. King David dies right at the beginning of the book of Kings, and that's really the book of Solomon and the rest of the kings. But Second Samuel really should be called the book of David. That's where all the stories of David's family, the rebellion against him, his consolidation of power and moving to Jerusalem and setting up Jerusalem, that's all in Second Samuel. But First Samuel starts at the birth of Samuel. So here it is. And here's another lesson from Hannah's prayer. When Hannah came to the temple with her son Samuel, she told Eli, "My Lord, as your soul lives, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here with you to pray to the Lord." With you, right? That's the important phrase there, with you. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said, "From here, the halakha, right, the law is that it is forbidden to sit within 4 cubits of one who is praying." It's derived from these words, as the verse says, "who stood here with you," indicating that Eli stood alongside Hannah because she was praying. So what's the word here? The word here is imcha bazeh. He stood there. She was standing there, and you were with me, right? You were standing next to me, but you're not too close to me. What do they derive that from? Well, you're sitting alongside me. You're not sitting next to me. You're sitting with me. And the rabbis clearly derived something that they wanted to tell you, which is you're not supposed to get within 4 amot of somebody while they're praying. And what is 4 amot, 4 cubits? It's roughly 6 feet, 6 to 8 feet. Stay within 6 to 8 feet. Don't get in my circle of my personal space. And 4 amot in the Talmud is your personal space. That is the space that is your space. If somebody comes into that space, they're coming into your space. So that's considered to be too close. And that is your personal sphere. That is the area that, like, when the Talmud talks about what's your space in an area, it's 4 amot all around you. So it's kind of it's your line of it's like your boundary. Personal boundary. Okay, so that's what it is. And they said when you're praying, people shouldn't get into your boundary, so shouldn't get into your face while you're praying. Okay, that makes sense, but it's something they wanted you to know. I mean, it's not really clear from that, but they said it is. They said it's implied because it doesn't say she was too close to him. Additionally, there's another thing we're going to read, which again, this is an example of the rabbis trying to teach us something that doesn't appear to be there, but it's an interesting lesson. Additionally, Hannah's emphasis in speaking to Eli, for this youth, I prayed, right? The emphasis on this youth indicates that she came to protect him from danger. What's that about? Now, here's a story, a midrash. Don't know where it came from, but they're going to tell us a little story. As Rabbi Elazar said, Samuel was the one who taught halakha in the presence of his teacher. So he taught a law in the presence of his teacher. Hannah wanted to pray that he not be punished by death at the hand of heaven for his transgression. What's she saying? Well, there's a lesson here. They're going to tell us now that Samuel taught a lesson in the presence of Eli, and he shouldn't have done that. A person who is a student of someone is not supposed to give lessons or laws in the presence of that teacher. If the teacher is not there, you can. But if the teacher is standing there, you're not supposed to give laws in front of that teacher. It's considered disrespectful. And it's considered so disrespectful that when it says the hand of heaven will kill you, that means you will die if that happens. Well, let's take a look what they're saying specifically here. And here's the lesson he taught. As it is stated, and they slaughtered the cow and they brought the youth to Eli. And that's just what happened just in the previous line. The verse is puzzling because they slaughtered the cow. Therefore, they brought the youth to Eli. What does one have to do with the next? They slaughtered the cow and then they brought the youth. What happened? Rather, this is what happened. Eli said to those who brought the offering, call a priest. He will come and slaughter the offering. Samuel saw them looking for a priest to slaughter the animal. He said to them, and remember, he's a kid at this point. Why do you need to look for a priest to slaughter it? Slaughter of an offering performed by a non-priest is still valid. Okay, it's a law. They brought him before Eli to clarify his statement. Eli said to him, how do you know this? And Samuel said to him, it is written in the Torah, and the priest shall slaughter, indicating that the offering may only be slaughtered by a priest. It is written, and the priest shall offer. Only from the stage of receiving the blood in the bowls and onward is it a mitzvah incumbent on the priests alone. From here, the halakha that slaughter by a non-priest is acceptable, is derived. And so what they're saying right here is that just show you if commentary is here. No, but I think you can figure it out. What they're saying is that Samuel came up with his own interpretation, which is that a priest doesn't have to kill the animal. The only thing the priest has to do is offer and receive the blood. A non-priest can actually slaughter it. So he derived that from where it says in the Torah, the priest shall offer, and it doesn't just say the priest shall slaughter there. So Samuel derived that law. Eli said to Samuel, you have spoken well. You're right. You're right. You interpreted the Torah, which, by the way, is telling us that Eli and Samuel and the people in those days were already interpreting the Torah, right? They were already coming up with halakha. They were already like the rabbis. They were already coming up, and they were, obviously, to some extent, they were interpreting it. But this idea that they're interpreting it like they did is interesting, because did the priests in those times talk about halakha? We don't know. It doesn't exactly say that. It says that the priests teach the law, are guided by the law, read the law, but deriving halakha from it, we don't really see that in the Bible. Though, again, it's clear the priests were competent and would have been the people doing that. But anyways, the rabbis imagine that this is what the priests are doing, no matter what. But Samuel, you issued a halachic ruling in the presence of me, your teacher, right? And anyone who issues a halachic ruling in the presence of his teacher, even if the particular halacha is correct, is liable for death at the hand of heaven for showing contempt for his teacher. So you're right, Samuel, but you have to die because you did it, which seems really, really strict. Very, very tough. At this point, right, Hannah came and shouted before him, I am the woman who stood with you to pray to the Lord. Do not punish this child who was born of my prayers. This is a miraculous child. Now, they interpret this conversation happening in the conversation that we have. The rabbis do what they oftentimes do, which is they insert dialogue that's not there. Why? In some cases, it needs it. In some cases, we want to know what's not being said. In other cases, you're like, really? Is that what you got from it? But this is what they get from it. So Eli says to her, let me punish him, and I will pray for mercy that the Holy One, blessed be he, will grant you a son better than this one. So we'll punish him. He'll die, but you'll get a better son. Or at least I'll pray for it, right? I'll pray to God that you'll get one. And she said to him, for this youth I prayed. I don't want another kid. I want this one. And so from the words, this youth, they interpret it as her having this whole dialogue with Eli saying, you can't take my son. Give me another son. This is the son. You don't give me a replacement son. I want this son. Now, again, none of that is in the text. The dialogue that they invented, inserted there, you'd be like, where's this even come from? But they wanted to teach a lesson, which is that a student is not supposed to render a decision in front of his teacher. So that's what they wanted to get across to you, was that you don't do that. That's considered disrespectful to your teacher. Again, is it the way we live? No, it's not. We don't look at it like that. But they definitely, in those days, as we saw from previous classes, they believed that you had to really show respect for your teachers. Thank you. You do sometimes. Yeah. Today, in that moment. Anyway, so that's an interesting thing that they want to teach you, which has little to do with prayer, but a lot to do with their values. But I guess you could say when you pray for something and God gives it to you, you don't usually look at that as something that's interchangeable anymore. The thing that she prayed for, that she got, she wanted, that was her miracle. Another child that would be also a miracle would be a different miracle, but it wouldn't be that miracle. And that is something that I think we can relate to. But here's another great lesson from Hannah. This one's a beautiful lesson and one of the more poetic and powerful lines that we've read so far. It's kind of heart-wrenching, actually, and it deals with the heart. The Gemara continues to deal with Hannah's prayer. It is said, and Hannah spoke on her heart. On her heart, right? On her heart. Not in her heart or to her heart, but on her heart. All libi. Not belly be or L-E-B, but all libi, on my heart. Right? Why does it say on her heart instead of a different phrase? Rabbi Elazar said in the name of Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra, Hannah spoke to God concerning matters of her heart. She said before him, Master of the universe, of all the organs you created in a woman, you have not created one in vain. Every organ fulfills its purpose. Eyes to see, ears to hear, a nose to smell, a mouth to speak, hands with which to perform labor, feet with which to walk, and breasts with which to nurse. If so, these breasts that you've placed on my heart, to what purpose did you place them? Was it not in order to nurse with them? Grant me a son, and I will nurse with them. Now, let's just assume for a second, which we can pretty much assume, that was written by a man. But what he just said, whoever, again, the writer of this, basically just taught us that and again, maybe he dealt with it in his own family, maybe he dealt with it with his own wife who had difficulty, with fertility. But this idea, how does he interpret on her heart? Her breasts are on her heart. And she says, if these breasts aren't going to nurse, what good are they? God, you don't create anything without a reason. Pretty wow. That's a pretty powerful line. Because her prayer is essentially to God, don't make the organs of my body not have a reason. So it's a pretty powerful prayer, a pretty powerful interpretation. I mean, it was a pretty powerful prayer to begin with, but that prayer, the way they just reframed it, is really powerful. So that's what they took from the lesson of on her heart instead of in her heart. They just took that lesson away. It's an amazing one. It's a weird one, if you think about it, because then it gets to the question of, why are there nipples on a man? Answer that question, Mike. You don't. It's one of those questions you're not supposed to answer. And think about it. Weird, right? I don't know. It's one of those questions I saw once in a book. Like, these are things you can't figure out. I'm sure there's a scientific reason for it. Somebody must have given a scientific reason for it. But that's a very powerful and serious reason for why she wants to have a kid. So it's a very powerful line, I think. It definitely sticks with me. And for anyone who's ever dealt with infertility, it's a pretty powerful challenge to God. So there's a certain audaciousness to her prayer, right? There's a certain level of confrontation with God on that prayer, I think, right? Because she's essentially saying to God, she's challenging him. Why'd you create me like this? So we're going to get to the audaciousness in a second. I can't remember if this part's in the Ein Yaakov, but we're going to go through it. Interestingly, it's just a couple paragraphs, but this is a weird one. And it's tangential. It says so right here, and it's true. I mean, it doesn't say that in the text. That's not bolded, but it's definitely tangential. But it's going to say, this is another thing that Rabbi Elazar said in the name of Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra, which I guess has to do with prayer, or at least one way that people get into a prayerful mood, which is fasting, which we're going to think about, of course, at Yom Kippur, which this year is on a Shabbat. So this is a really interesting issue. You're not supposed to fast on Shabbat unless it's Yom Kippur. And when people fasted on Shabbat, this presented an interesting dilemma, because you're not supposed to do it. You'll see why. That's why it's so unusual when it happens, and it only really, again. So, for example, let me just make it clear. Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, falls on a Shabbat. We don't fast on that day. We fast on the 10th of Av instead. It's delayed a day. Yeah, so we take it seriously. So seriously, you're going to see what it's going to say right now. So anyone who sits in observance of a fast on Shabbat, his merit is great, and they tear up and repeal his sentence of 70 years, because everyone is enjoying himself and a feast is prepared, and it is more difficult to fast on Shabbat than any other day. So if somebody fasts on Shabbat, this is a wonderfully powerful example of teshuvah, of repentance. And even if the person has been given a very serious sentence, not in court, but in the heavenly court by God, if fasting on Shabbat will get you a tremendous amount of merit, put it that way. Okay, because it's so hard. If you fast on a day that everyone else is fasting, it's not hard. When everyone's having a good time and you're fasting, that's really, really special. And you're doing it because you really want to get, make amends to God. But of course, here's the challenge. Paradox, right? Nevertheless, they hold him accountable for failing to fulfill the halakha of oneg, the light on Shabbat, right? It says right there, the deen of oneg Shabbat. Shabbat's supposed to be an oneg. So how does somebody who's fasting on Shabbat and they violated the idea of doing delight on Shabbat, how can you do that? You did something because you wanted to be good, but you did it in a way that again is problematic. What do? The Gemara asks, what is the remedy to atone and avoid punishment? And Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, he must sit in observance of another fast on a weekday to atone for his fast on Shabbat. So you can get out of it, but you have to fast again. You have to fast another weekday, by the way, not another Shabbat, because you'd be in a cycle of constantly fasting. You actually, not even in a cycle, you keep getting demerits for fasting on Shabbat and not balancing it out. So yeah, so it shows you that people fasted in Judaism, and some people still do, as an act of penance. Now, of course, we do that on Yom Kippur as a community, but the rabbis are essentially putting out there that when everyone else is fasting, it's not considered as hard because you're kind of going along with the flow. You're doing what everyone else is doing. So doing it when you don't have to do it is considered an act of penance. So the Talmud talks about it, just did. So this is not a new thing, and this is not a limited thing, if you will. But I will show you how serious this was. In Judaism, we actually have a tradition that let's see, I'll show you right now. Show you. This was called the tradition that we had in Judaism was called, I'm looking for not just for holidays. Let me make that very clear. Whoa. So these are personal fasts, by the way. Let me just pop that up. So some people fasted. So besides the Day of Atonement and days like Tisha B'Av and these other days, these are the days that are fasts that are mentioned, in Jewish history, right? There's quite a lot of them, right? Some pious Jews also fast every Monday and Thursday, and those are days we read the Torah in commemoration of the destruction of the temple or of the burning of the Torah and the desecration of God's name. The first and second Mondays and the first Thursday of Iyar and Mar Cheshvan, etc. These were also, these are all fasts done, for when synagogues were threatened, when there was no rain. So you can see, these were done quite frequently. And fasting when you had bad dreams. And I will just say here again, Shabbat, the only fixed fast day that may be celebrated on Shabbat is the Day of Atonement, is Yom Kippur. All the others, if they fall on Shabbat, are postponed. Right? So these are days that you're not supposed to fast. So you can see, fasting was not just done on the holidays. And again, oftentimes people would engage in fasts for other reasons as well. So that's why it's talking about this, is because it was not uncommon for people to do this. and consider it an act of piety. So let's read another interpretation of another thing that Hannah did. After explaining the uncommon expression on her heart, the Gemara cites an additional statement in the matter of Hannah. And Rabbi Elazar said, Hannah spoke impertinently toward God on high, as it is stated, and she prayed unto the Lord, as opposed to the common phrase to the Lord. This teaches that she spoke impertinently toward on high. So it says in the Bible, it says that she fasted al Adonai, which literally means on God. And the rabbis are going to interpret this as that it's impertinent, it's aggressive, it's challenging. So here's another word, or another use of actually that same word, all. She talked about all libi, on her heart. Now it says on God. So instead of saying praying to God, it says that she prayed on God. And so they're almost saying like she's aggressively praying to God, which seems like a bad thing, right? The rabbis are saying that would seem like you're being impertinent, which you don't want to do. Well, on a similar note, Rabbi Elazar said Elijah spoke impertinently toward God on high as well on Mount Carmel, as it is stated, answer me, Lord, answer me, that this people will know that you are the Lord God, and you have turned their hearts backward, claiming that God caused Israel to sin. On this topic, Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yitzhak said, from where do we know that the Holy One, blessed be he, ultimately conceded to Elijah that he was correct? And again, what is it saying is that when in the story that we read about in the book of Kings, when much later, well, not much later, but hundreds of years after Hannah, Elijah the prophet is doing this challenge with the priests of Baal, the Canaanite god on Mount Carmel. He's the one prophet left, and he's challenging these people that are Jews that are worshiping, bless you, that are worshiping Baal and the Canaanite gods. He says to them, he says to God, very aggressively to God, do something, because you're the one who's turned their hearts backward. And so the rabbis are saying, look, Hannah might have been impertinent, but Elijah is completely aggressive. He actually blames God for the reason that these people do this. Now, this is going to be an important theme for what we're going to talk about tonight, which is, did God create us in such a way that, isn't it God's fault that we do bad things? Well, Elijah definitely says so. And so now the rabbis are saying, was God cool with this? Was God really okay with Elijah saying, you turn their hearts backward? You did it, God. You made them pray to other gods. Well, it's written in a future prophecy, in that day, says the Lord, I will assemble the lame and will gather those who are abandoned and those with whom I have dealt in wickedness. That is from the prophet Micah. God states that he caused Israel to act wickedly. Now, the translation here, again from the text, this text from Micah, we read many moons ago on Tuesday, but it's one of those Bayom Hahu, in that day. There will be a day to come, right? A day in the future when I will assemble, look at the translation, I will assemble the lame, the outcast, and those I have treated harshly. Now, the rabbis just interpreted that last line, that I have treated harshly, as a recognition that God says, yeah, I've treated people hard. I've treated them hard, which seems to imply that God feels a sense of regret that he treated people hard. So what's it based on? It's based on this idea that the rabbis have now introduced to us, that doesn't God bear some of the blame for our weaknesses? As I said, this is a major theological issue that Judaism looks at very differently than Christianity. When we talk about original sin, in Judaism, it's not treated like that. There is a sense that human beings are created kind of messed up. but it's not a sin. It's not an original sin. And to some extent, God created us that way. So isn't this God's responsibility to some extent? How can God hold us responsible for the way we were created? Now, again, that doesn't mean that everything we do that's wrong, we can blame on God. But there is an understanding that, come on, God, you know what we're like. And it's a very different idea. And that's what we're going to be talking about now. In the midst of prayer and other parts of the Bible that the rabbis are going to pick apart and teach from. So here we go. Similarly, Rabbi Chama, son of Rabbi Hanina, said, had it not been for these verses, the legs of the enemies of Israel, which is a euphemism for Israel itself, would have collapsed as Israel had been unable to withstand God's judgment. Now, the first verse is the one we just read from Micha, which is God will gather up those who've been judged harshly. So the rabbis, and again, the word enemies for Israel is a euphemism for Jews themselves, not the enemies of Israel, but actually Israel. We're our own worst enemy, if you will. And they're saying when the rabbis use that phrase, enemies of Israel, they don't literally mean enemies outside of Israel. They mean us. So if you're careful in the reading of these, you will see that God must be compassionate to us because we're messed up. One is the verse that we just mentioned, which is written to those whom I've dealt in wickedness. Right? So that's the one from Micha. Another one is the verse that is written, behold, like clay in the potter's hand, so are you in my hand, house of Israel. And that line is from Jeremiah. Behold, like clay in the potter's hand, so are you in my hand, house of Israel. That's another one. And another one is the verse in which it is written, and I will give you a new heart and a new spirit, and I will place within you, and I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh, and I will give you a heart of flesh. That's the very famous line of, you will have a new heart, a heart of flesh, a living heart, if you will, not the heart of stone that you have. These three verses indicate that God influences a person's decision, and therefore one does not have sole responsibility for his actions. This is our out. The rabbi said those three lines indicate that God is cutting us a break. And the break is we're human. And God recognizes that that's the way we are created. Again, it's not an excuse for everything we do, but it is an understanding of our humanity and the fact that we are going to make bad decisions. And we need God's grace, because otherwise we couldn't survive. If God only judged us the way we deserve to be judged, we'd be destroyed. So let's take a look at this. And again, this is essentially the difference between, if you will, original sin and the Jewish version of original sin, which this is, which is that we're all created with a yetzer hara. We're all created with an evil inclination. Rav Papa said there's a clearer proof from here. And I will place my spirit within you, and I will cause you to walk in my statutes, which is also from Ezekiel. It's from the next line. And so that line seems to be, well, if you're talking about God helping us out, cutting us a break, how about God not just removing our heart of stone and giving us a living heart? How about I'm going to cause you to walk in my laws? So there's an addendum here, as the rabbis normally do. But now the rabbis are going to say, we talked about Elijah. We're going to come back to this, by the way. Don't worry. I mean, this is the background now. Now that the rabbis have introduced this, this is the background. And it's almost like we've met a new character in the story, but we still have the other story going. So we still have the story going of the prayers in the background, right? The story of Hannah's prayer, Elijah's prayer we just read about being impertinent, and then now we're going to get Moses being impertinent. So they told us Elijah was impertinent. That's even like one story. Now they're going to get to Moses, who seems to be impertinent when he talks to God a lot, which again gives Hannah cover. But that's also, again, all of this is going on in the background again, with the other context of prayer in general. And also, again, it's sometimes you have to remind yourself of what else is going on in the background, because there's these other stories that are still rolling out. This other story of praying impertinently, and also why we need to pray, which is that we're human, that we make mistakes. So that's what we're, just remember that those things are going on simultaneously through these texts. So now let's read Moses impertinently, being aggressive in his prayers with God. Rabbi Elazar said, Moses also spoke impertinently toward God on high, as it is stated in the verse, following the sin of those who murmured against God in the desert. And Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire subsided. And this verse is interpreted homiletically. Do not read El to the Lord, but rather all. Now, in this case, they're basically saying Moses did the same thing that Elijah did, and what Hannah did, which is that he spoke, do not read El, but rather all. Now, that's not actually what it said. It actually says that Moses spoke to God, but they recognize that Moses seems to be, if not using the word all, they use the word all, he does seem to be very aggressive or challenging in the way he talks to God and in his prayers to some extent. The Gemara explains the basis of this interpretation as the sages of the school of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov would indiscriminately read Aleph as Ein and Ein as Aleph in the case of transforming El to Al. So again, the difference between El and Al is an Ein versus Ein here versus an Aleph. Al being on and El being to, right? They're saying that the rabbis in Rabbi Eliezer's school always played off the El versus Al, right? Just so you know, this is not a insignificant issue for modern Israel, because, as you know, if you didn't catch it already, the airline for Israel is called El Al, with a play on the words El Al. The two words, again, El and Al being there together, which is the way they translate it, is to the skies or to up, right? Upwards, El Al. But it's a play on the fact that the words are almost the same in Hebrew. You don't see it as much in, you don't see it, well, I think you do actually see it in English, but in Hebrew, and that's why you have the L, the E and the A differently, and Aleph and Ayin. So, that's the Israeli airline, El Al. It's a play on those two words that oftentimes sound the same and are written with a different letter, which oftentimes is hard to know whether it's an Aleph or an Ayin. They're actually used to be pronounced differently. So Ayin used to be spelled, the Ayin was pronounced more gutturally, Ayin. And in Aleph was a softer Aleph, like in the word, well, there's a lot of words that begin with El, but like Elohim, but Ayin, we don't say it like that anymore. But the guttural Ayin is still definitely used in Arabic, which is why in Hebrew, for example, this is a real important difference. In Hebrew, Gaza is written with an Ayin, So in Hebrew, it's Aza. But in Arabic, it's Gaza. It almost comes out like a G, which is why it's Gaza. In Hebrew, it's actually Aza. It's and the guttural G at the beginning of that isn't heard. And that's why in Arabic it's pronounced Gaza, but in English and in Hebrew, it's Aza. So it's complicated when you hear Israelis talk about Gaza, they'll call it Aza, and you're like, are they talking about the same thing? Yeah, because we don't have the guttural sound and we use the biblical name for it, which is Aza. But it used to, even in Hebrew, it used to have a more guttural sound to it, more like the Arabic. But it was never as pronounced as G, like a G, instead of aw, aw. But it's an Ein that comes from so far back in your throat that it almost becomes a G. But yeah, so when you hear Israelis talking about Gaza, it's Aza, and it's not, or Aza, and it doesn't even sound like Gaza. Anyways, but El and All, they play off of that. So, but let's stay with this for a second. The Gemara explains the basis for the interpretation as, again, it says, oh yeah, it says, right, we read that part, that they did it. But beyond that, right, look at what Moses also does. The sages of the school of Rabbi Yanai, however, say proof that Moses spoke impertinently toward God on high is derived from here. And Moses' rebuke at the beginning of Deuteronomy and Di Zahav, this is an entry in the list of places where Moses had spoken to God, to Israel, and there is no place encountered by that name. It is interpreted as an allusion to another matter. What is Di Zahav? Okay, because it's a place that we hadn't heard of in Numbers. What's Di Zahav? We must clarify what is the meaning of and Di Zahav. The sages of the school of Rabbi Yanai said that Moses said the following before the Holy One, blessed be he, to atone for Israel after the sin of the golden calf. Master of the universe, because of the gold and silver that you lavished upon Israel during the exodus from Egypt until they said enough, die. It was the wealth that caused Israel to make the golden calf. And so they said the word Di Zahav is actually not Di Zahav, which was probably the name of a city, town, a village. Di Zahav is Dai Zahav. And what is Dai Zahav? Enough. Dai is enough, like Daenu. Dai Zahav is enough gold and enough silver. Israel said to God in Egypt, we don't need any more gold. We don't want it. We don't need it. First of all, we got to schlep it out of here. And the rabbis point out that because they had that gold, they ended up making the golden calf. So God, you caused this problem by giving us the stuff to begin with, which again is kind of blaming, God for giving us something good. And then we screwed it up. But God, you screwed us up by giving it to us in the first place, which, by the way, that's literally like spoiling your kid and then your kid coming back to you and going, I'm screwed up because you spoiled me, Dad. I never could adjust to the world because you took such good care of me and gave me everything I wanted. Now, again, there is something to be said for that. You could argue that you could spoil your child to the point that you've ruined their ability to ever work or be productive on their own. That is possible. But it's also disappointing when, especially adult children, don't take responsibility for their actions. But that's what's going on here. And that's why I'm telling you right now, the rabbis introduce some very interesting theological issues. And I guess you could say psychological issues too, which are when we do something wrong, do we look at the situation or do we look sometimes at the roots of those situations and then focus maybe too much on the roots of those situations? But look, the rabbis are going to say, look, they're a reality, right? There is a reality to this. So they just, I would say they invented it, but there's a city called Di Zahav, or a town called Di Zahav, and they just taught a lesson, which isn't necessarily in the Bible, but makes sense. It's not that far-fetched, that Moses says to God, you gave us the gold and silver in the first place. So, establishing a general moral principle, the sages, the school of Rabbi Yanai said, a lion does not roar standing over a basket of straw. from which he derives no pleasure. But he roars standing over a basket of meat, as he only roars when he's satiated, right? So a lion doesn't roar, right, over things that it can't enjoy. But over a basket of meat, you're going to hear the lion make noise, which is an example of, let's take a look. And by the way, again, this is what the rabbis are going to teach us today about human behavior and about I guess you could say, God's role in our own frailties, if you will. And maybe people too. Similarly, Rabbi Oshaya said, this is comparable to a person who had a lean but large-limbed cow. At one point, he fed it lupines, a choice food. And soon thereafter, the cow was kicking him. He said to the cow, who caused you to begin kicking me, if not for the lupines? I fed you. Here too, the sin was caused by an abundance of good. So, if you take too good of care of something, and they get spoiled by it, you're going to have a problem because they get used to it, and then you get problems if you don't keep it up. So, to some extent, God created a problem by taking such good care of us that when we didn't get the stuff always that we wanted, then we behaved bad. We were like the cow that started kicking when it didn't get its stuff. Everybody with me so far? Right? Now those are all strange, but they're understandable. This one, I have to say, is my favorite. And I love this one because you can almost imagine the rabbis discussing this story and like thinking of people that they knew personally like this. I love this one. All right. So this analogy, if you've never had a horse, a cow, if you've never had a lion, okay, even if you've seen them at the zoo, but check this one out. This one is all about people. The Gemara offers another analogy. Rabbi Chia bar Abba said, that Rabbi Yochanan said, this is comparable to a person who had a son. He bathed him and anointed him with oil. He fed him and gave him drink and hung a purse of money around his neck. Then he brought his son to the entrance of a brothel. What could the son do to avoid sinning? You set him up. You set him up. You set up your boy to do the wrong thing. So this one, like I said, put yourself in the shoes of these people who are talking about human behavior. And again, very rarely will somebody do exactly that, but they recognize that there are situations where people almost set up their kids for failure by putting them in situations where they almost are you're almost guaranteed they're going to make the wrong decision. I mean, I see it all the time. I mean, it's almost a joke that, you see some rich kid going off to college and, who's never had any real responsibility and, is given all these opportunities and all this money. And like, what do you think is going to happen when they go to college? Yeah. So to me, this one is almost timeless because there are a lot of cases of people who, look, they still if they make a bad decision, it's still their decision. But if you put somebody in a situation where they're almost have to make a bad decision, doesn't the dad have some responsibility to that? So, you know, it's almost like if you put if you do everything, you know, essentially, with the exception of having the person do the wrong thing or making a bad decision, but giving them all the tools and all the opportunity, then they're going to do it. So look, we know that we have a Yetzer Hara. I mean, the rabbis aren't getting into it so far yet. I think we'll get to one section in a moment where they'll say the evil inclination. But the evil inclination is only part of it, right? The evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara, which is a part of every human being, is there already. It's already there. But what they're also talking about is creating and engaging in putting someone in an opportunity to do something wrong, to give them and set them up in a situation for excessive opportunities to make bad decisions. Right? Yeah. So the modern equivalent is that you take a kid for their 21st birthday to Vegas and you buy them a nice suite, give them a bunch of money, drop them off in front of a strip club and say, have a nice time. I mean, that's what this is what the equivalent is. Now, again, the person still has to make the decision, right? But if you give somebody tremendous opportunity and they already have a Yetzer Hara, what do you expect them to do? So are the rabbis correct in saying that all of these situations are ones where we had tremendous opportunity, where it was only, we only had almost the decision to make a bad, the only road in front of us was to make a bad one? I don't know. That's another step. But the fact that people are in situations like that, there's no question. There's no question. And again, that doesn't, the person still has to make the decision on their own. But the rabbis do recognize that if you already have the willingness or the desires to do things, and then you're given tremendous opportunity, come on. So, by the way, that's not an excuse in court of law. You can't say, well, they gave me the opportunity, gave me this bag, and I had no choice but to buy the drugs. I mean, you can't say that. But there is this understanding that who the person's going to make a bad decision. There's going to be consequences for it, but don't you bear some of the responsibility? So the rabbis took the line that we originally are basing it off of, which is that God said in Micha, I've treated people harshly. Your original supposition might have been that God's punished us hard, right? That's on the face of it, the simple answer. But the rabbis actually give us another one that's even like a whole nother part of this, which is that part of it being treated harshly isn't just being judged harshly, but being put into a situation where we have way too much opportunity to sin. And so the rabbis essentially are saying being treated harshly is also this. It's not just being punished hard, it's also being put in a situation where we have too much opportunity to do bad. So that's an interesting, like I said, to me, very interesting idea. Not the end of these analogies, right? These are analogies that the rabbis will use. And again, this is a mashal. This is a parable. So a lot of these parables, as we mentioned before, are very similar to what the Christian Bible does when Jesus gives parables. A lot of Jews don't recognize or know, they're not familiar with the fact that this style of parable is very, very common in the Talmud and in the Midrash. The rabbinic literature is chock full of these, right? Parables. And the parables are oftentimes these kind of parables where a father screws up with his son, right? So this type of this type of parable you'll see all over the Talmud. What's interesting is one of the most famous texts in the entire, I think, one of the most powerful texts in the whole Christian Bible is the parable. Well, this translation calls it the lost son, but it's really the prodigal son that you know it by. Check this out. What can this be? Well, what this can be compared?
Is that the line you were talking about?
Uh-huh. There was a man who had two sons. The younger one said to the father, "Father, give me a share of the estate." So he divided his property between them, right? This is a son who goes wrong and a son who doesn't go wrong. Look, this is a great mashal. We haven't found this one in the Talmud, but we found other ones. And look at what happens in this mashal. Not long after that, the younger son got all he had, set off for a distant country, and then squandered his wealth in wild living. After he'd spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. And he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. And when he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I'll set out and go back to my father and say, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your servants,' right?" So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. And the son said to him, "Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring me the best robe and put it on him, a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring me the fattened calf and kill it, and let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive. He is lost and is found." And so they began to celebrate. It's a great story, right? I once was lost and now I'm found. That's where amazing grace comes from the prodigal son. It comes from this line. So they began to celebrate. And this is a story, again, of a son who goes the wrong direction. He's a story of the son who had a bag of money tied around his neck and went to a brothel. This story is the same theme. It's the same mode. It's the same stories. By the way, this isn't the end of the story. Everyone forgets this part of the story, and this is the best part of the story. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near to the house, he heard music and dancing, because everybody thinks it's just about the father and son. It's not, because the older son gets involved. So he called to one of the servants and asked, "What is going on?" And he says, "Your brother has come." And he replied, "And your father is killed in the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound." And the older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him, but he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. And when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes," hello, the brothel, the business, it's right here. "You've killed the fattened calf for him." And this is the great line, right? This is the line that Jesus really teaches off of, right? If you think about it. "My son," the father said, "you are always with me and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." That's the end of the story, right? It's the end of the story. But it's a very powerful line because it's not just a story about a father who's happy that his son survived. The story is also the story of the brother who says, "What about me, Dad? I never screwed up. You're going crazy over this other brother. My younger brother was screwed up, and now you're going crazy for him." And so the story is also about all of us who don't look at, we look at all the attention that goes to somebody who has teshuvah, that has repentance, and everyone goes crazy because the person, screwed up and has now been redeemed. And we go, "Why is this person getting attention? I never screwed up. Shouldn't I get attention for not screwing up?" And Jesus says, "Look, and it's a Jewish lesson, which is, yeah, of course. But this guy was gone. He was dead, and now he's come back. He's got another chance. And that we've got to celebrate. We've got to celebrate the repentance. And that's something that's hard for you. It's hard for you to do that. And he says, "I haven't forgotten about you, son." Right? That's also the important thing, is that Jesus, teaches that, the father has to comfort the son. You don't just say, "Hey, dummy, your brother was gone and now he's back. No, he says, you have everything. I'm leaving everything to you, right? He almost says to him at that point, don't worry. And people miss that part, by the way, of the story, which is you're already the older son. You're already inheriting the majority of stuff. Here it almost says, you're not getting that kid who's screwed up. I'm not giving him anything, right? He says to him, everything I have is yours, right? He actually says to them that, which people don't concentrate on, but I think that's the original part of the original Jewish lesson on this too was inheritance, right? Right.
Mm-hmm.
He says to him, everything I have is yours, which to me, I interpret as the inheritance. He took it already. It's gone. He's not getting anything more. Everything else that is still here is yours. Don't worry. But this guy, we got to be happy for him. So that is a great lesson for people who look at people who get showered on with attention for coming back in and then feel bad. Like, I never left. I didn't, why are you giving this guy all the attention? I should get attention for never leaving. So this is the great version of a mashal of a parent who has kids who screw up. We're going to see another one tonight. So I love the prodigal son story because I know that that's a Jewish story and I love the message from it. And so I never feel uncomfortable teaching from that story. But I want to tell you, there are so many in the Talmud of sons who screw up. And usually it's not two sons, by the way. That's the unusual thing about the prodigal son is that usually the story is there's one son, which is weird because like you'd think, well, then those are stories about Jesus. They're not. I mean, they're not in that sense, but the stories of a father with a son is always God with us. So that's always the mashal. It's always that father, the father in that story is God, right? The father in that story is God and we're the son. Okay. Any comments, questions?
No, it's pretty interesting. Tell you.
Yeah. And I never had a son, so I don't have to deal with the same stuff that a father does with a son. There's a different dynamic there. And I don't care. You can argue with me about that, but I know it's a fact being a son. But fathers and daughters also have a dynamic and mothers and sons have a dynamic, et cetera. And there always is a dynamic, but that story reflects also a unique situation with that. Though again, I think about, all the time, did I spoil my daughters and did I give them too much and I give them unrealistic expectations for, things that they should have? I don't think I've put them in a situation where they'll get in trouble, but thank God they haven't shown that they will do that. But I get it. I mean, I definitely am worried about it. And again, you feel bad as a parent that the parents are essentially being blamed for that, but we blame God for it. So I guess, but again, at a certain point, an adult has to take responsibility for the decisions that they're making. At a certain point, you got to say, yeah, I get it. I was spoiled and I made bad decisions when I was younger. But look, in that prodigal son story, the kid eventually woke up. He woke up when he was foraging around like a pig and realized, hey, you know what? I can go back and have a good life just working for my dad. So he woke up. He had to wake up. He had to have a realization. All right, we're going to get another son one. I hope. I think we'll get to it. Another son one. The other one isn't as lighthearted as the one. Well, the one about the one we had about having the bag of money around his neck. But the next one is, well, we'll get to it. You'll see. It's also disturbing, but very true, I think. So on a similar note, Rav Acha, son of Rav Huna, said, Rav Sheshet said, that is what people say in a popular maxim. Filling his stomach is a type of sin. As it is stated, when they were fed and became full, they were sated, and their hearts were lifted, and they have forgotten me, which is a line from Hosea, which is basically Hosea is telling the people, or God is telling the people, hey, I know why people are not worshiping me. It's because their life is too good. Rav Nachman said, the principle is derived not from the verse in Hosea, but from here. And your heart is lifted and you forget the Lord. That's in Devarim. That's in Deuteronomy, a portion we just read a couple weeks ago. And the rabbis say that this principle is derived from here. You can also, different rabbis giving a tradition. And then the majority of rabbis said, it's from here in Deuteronomy. And they will have eaten and been sated and fattened, and they will turn to other gods. Yeah, that seems to be pretty clear. That is what makes us kind of go off in the wrong direction, being too comfortable. There's another one from Deuteronomy. And if you wish, they instead is derived from here. And Yeshurun grew fat and kicked. It's from portion 2 weeks from now. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani said, and Rabbi Yonatan said, from where in the Torah is it derived that the Holy One, blessed be, ultimately conceded to Moses that the reason for the sin of the golden calf was indeed the riches lavished upon Israel, as it is stated, and I gave them an abundance of silver and gold, which they used for the Baal. And that is from Hosea. Now, again, it doesn't seem like he's talking about there the golden calf. It seems like they're talking about Baal worship during the Canaanite period, not the Egyptian god or whatever the golden calf was, but that people, again, were oftentimes making idols. But what is interesting is that in Hosea, we have another line which basically says, yeah, every time I give them good stuff, they ruin it. They ruin it for themselves and for everybody because they use it for idol worship, right? Now the rabbis are going to say, what else do we learn from the golden calf? It is stated, and the Lord said to Moses, go and descend, for your people whom you have lifted out of the land of Egypt have been corrupted. Now, of course, you already noticed the other part of this, which is your people that you brought out of Egypt, right? Okay, get to that. What is the meaning of go and descend? Rabbi Elazar said, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Moses, Moses, descend from your greatness, right? Don't descend from the mountain, descend from your pinnacle of human evolution and development, and look what people are really doing. Isn't it only for the sake of Israel, so that you may serve as an emissary, that I granted you prominence? And now that Israel has sinned, why do I need you? There is no need for an emissary. So, yeah, as good as you are, Moses, I don't need you anymore because these people are so far below and have become so rotten that I don't really need you anymore, Moses. I can't really do anything with you. Immediately, Moses' strength waned and he was powerless to speak in defense of Israel. And once God said, leave me be that I may destroy them, which again, that part is in Exodus, right? Go and descend. The other part is in Deuteronomy, but the idea is in Exodus too, which is that God says, I'm going to destroy the people. Then Moses said to himself, if God is telling me to let him be, it must be because of this matter is dependent upon me. Immediately Moses stood and strengthened in prayer and asked that God have mercy on the nation of Israel and forgive them for their transgression. And so Moses woke up to this idea that, wait a second, maybe God is telling me I do have the power to argue on their behalf. So on one hand, he felt defeated because of what God had said to him. But on another hand, he reads between the lines of what God's saying and says, oh, maybe I can now step up and do what I need to do to defend them. And so that's what's interesting about that dialogue, which isn't really there, what the rabbis interpret, because one level of it is there, which is that at some point Moses decides, I'm going to speak up on behalf of Israel. But this idea that because of what God said, he almost couldn't, that's pretty wild. But it's an interesting dialogue. And now we're going to get to this other mashal, which I was pretty sure we'd get to. And here it is. This one, I said, is not as feel good as the other ones we read. But bear with us and just read it. Read it with me and think about it. And you'll see that it's not. It's actually, there's a point to this that I think is very true. There's a real truth to this. So God says, I'm going to destroy them. And Moses says, wait, don't do it. Don't do it. The Gemara says this is comparable to a king. Remember the father and the son, the king and the prince, the king, the rich guy and the kid. This is comparable to a king who became angry at his son who had sinned against him and beat him. Told you this isn't a feel-good part. Beat him, administering a severe beating. At that moment, a well-wisher of the king was sitting before him and witnessed the entire event and was afraid to say anything to the king about the excessive beating. Meanwhile, the king said to his son, were it not for this well-wisher of mine who is sitting before me, I would have killed you. Upon hearing this, the king's friend said to himself, this is clearly a sign that this matter, rescuing the son from the hands of his father, is dependent on me. Immediately he stood and rescued him from the king. So, right? The mashal, the parable has three characters: the king, the son, and the friend. In the Bible, the king is God, the son is us, Israel, and the friend is Moses. So in the parable, the friend realizes that he can stop the king from beating the hell out of the son. Now, I told you, this is not, child abuse is not something that, we laugh at and say today, hey, there's make an excuse for it or something like that. But Moses sees that God is very willing to destroy the people and realizes that because he's there and God said this to him, that maybe he can stop this from happening, right? So the line is, leave me be that I may destroy them. When God says that to Moses, leave me be, right? The capital M, right? Let me alone, I will destroy them. That's the opening that Moses has to say, oh, if God's saying that to me, then maybe I can stop him from destroying them. So, look, it's a weird story, and there's no question that the parable is a weird parable, but it is an interesting one from the standpoint of a person literally saying, I have the ability here to stop this beating from happening because I'm here as a witness to it, and again, even in a weird way, if this is a punishment that is supposed to be administered, I mean, maybe the son led a revolt against the king. I mean, we don't know what it is, but the point is that it's pretty bad. We have the opportunity sometimes to stop something from happening. Well, we don't think we do, but the opening is given to us, and then we have to take it. We have to take it. The person is literally being told, yeah, stop me from doing this. So that's what we just read. So I said, it's another father-son mashal. It's not a really nice one. It's the story of a father who is not cutting his son slack. It's almost the opposite of the prodigal son. This is a son getting a beat down, not welcomed back. But he is saved. He is saved by a friend, by Moses. So again, there might be situations where we are presented an opportunity to do something, to intervene, because the person essentially is saying to us, what do you think? Almost giving us an opening, give us an opportunity to do something. Anybody have any comments or thoughts on this mashal? So this is another one of the parables, and again, we'll see them a lot. You'll come to appreciate these father, son, king, prince parables. So, another lesson from the golden calf. Now leave me be, right? Same line. That my wrath will be enraged against them and I will consume them and I will make of you a great nation. And we haven't gotten to that part of this story. You've introduced it, rabbis. What are you going to make of that part? Explaining this verse, Rabbi Abahu said, were this verse not written in this manner, it would be impossible to utter it in deference to God. The phrase leave me be teaches that Moses grabbed the Holy One, blessed be he, as a person who grabs his friend by his garment would. And he said before him, Master of the universe, I will not leave until you forgive and pardon them. So that is this goes back to this audaciousness of Moses. That Moses literally grabbed God by not by the collar, but by the garment and said, please, right? I will not leave. I'm not letting go until you forgive and pardon them. And when God promised Moses, I will make of you a great nation, what was Moses' response? So what do we learn from that part of it? Right? Definitely going to deal with that. Rabbi Elazar said, Moses said before the Holy One, blessed be he, master of the universe. If a chair with 3 legs, the collective merit of 3 forefathers, is unable to stand before you in the moment of wrath, all the more so that a chair with 1 leg, my merit alone, will be able to withstand your wrath. Let me explain that first part. I think you can probably figure it out. Let's explain that. So when God tells Moses, I'm going to start over with you, I'll have a new race of Jews that'll come from you. Moses says to God, wait a second, hold it. You're going to start with me. I'm one guy. Even if I'm a good guy, if I'm a really good guy, these people have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They have 3 forefathers that were very special. And we always talk about the merit of our ancestors, right? Our 4 fathers and 4 mothers. If these people have screwed up so bad that you want to destroy them, and they've got 3 great people who have, they can connect to, how can I be the one? That's 3. And I'm 1. Can't. You can make the argument that he's also connected to the 3 that came before, but his point is, come on, I'm 1 person. If they're gonna forget about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and just use me, so if we said Elohei Moshe instead of Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzhak, Elohei Yaakov, I'm going to see Elohei Moshe. That ain't gonna work. I can't intercede on their behalf. I can't. My merit can't be good enough to compensate for those 3, right? So I'm only 1 leg. I'm a 1-legged table, 1-legged chair. That ain't gonna work. 3 legs is already tough, right? 3 legs are already, I can't afford to lose any more. That's what he's essentially saying, right? But those are the 3. And he says, moreover, but I have a sense of shame before my forefathers. Now they will say, see this leader that God placed over Israel? He requested greatness for himself, but did not pray for God to have mercy upon them in their troubled time. So if people hear what happened and all these people got destroyed and I was here to be their leader, what good am I? So he basically throws the logic back to God, which is no one's going to think I did anything right. If everyone got destroyed and only I survived and it was my responsibility to take care of those people, what good am I? And moreover, they'll say, he did it intentionally. He wanted God to only have his descendants be the ones that survived. The chosen people are only the descendants of Moses. He set it up that way. He requested greatness of himself, right? He only wanted the attention. He let everybody else be destroyed. Can't have that. Can't have that. So he he essentially puts it back on God, saying, what good am I going to be? And the Torah continues. Then Moses beseeched. So in the Exodus version, it says Vayachal. He beseeched before the Lord. Many interpretations were given for this uncommon term, Vayachal. Right? It's not a normal phrase, Vayachal. It's not the normal word we use, say, reached, right? Okay. Rabbi Elazar said, it teaches that Moses stood in prayer before the Holy One, blessed be he, until it made him ill. Don't just read Vayachal, read, it comes from Hechalalu. Moses made himself sick. He prayed so hard. Rava said, Moses stood in prayer until he nullified his vow, as the term Vayachal alludes to nullification. They said Vayachal can be read as a nullification, to end, right? Here is written Vayachal, and there is referring to vows. It is written, you shall not nullify lo yachal, his word. So there's a version of that in Numbers. It has lo yachal. And with regards to vow, the master said, he who vowed cannot nullify his vow, but others, the court, can nullify his vow for him. Here it is as if Moses nullified the Lord's vow to destroy Israel. So God couldn't nullify his own vow. Moses did. So Vayichal should be nullification. Moses nullified. One interpretation is that Moses got sick, his pleading, and another, he nullified it for God. Okay? Interesting. Shmuel said, the term Vayichal teaches that Moses gave his life, from the term halal, a dead person, for Israel, as it is stated, and if not, erase me, please, from your book. Which is that in that story in Exodus, Moses said to God, kill me too. Right? So there's the line. Now, if you will forgive their sin, well and good, but if not, erase me from the record that you have written. Write me out of your Torah, God. Kill me. Erase me. So there is Moses saying, erase me from this. Right? So their Vayichal is connected to halal. Halal. Rava, also interpreting this verse, said, Rav Yitzhak said, the term Vayichal teaches that he caused the divine attribute of mercy to take effect upon them, which is that he made it take effect. The word chala there means take effect. And what did he make take effect? The midat of rachamim, the divine attribute of mercy, the essence of God's mercy, rachamim. Because God has different attributes, God has different aspects. And in the Kabbalah, this aspect of rachamim is considered to be one of the ways that we see God operating in the world, which is through mercy. On the other side of the merciful side of God is the judgment side of God, the justice side of God, the, doing what has to be done side. But those sides balance out, right? They're supposed to be balanced. Can't have only mercy. You also have to have some punishment and justice too. So, but Moses said to God, we need to activate the mercy side. God, you got it. You're too much into the punishment right now. You got to also have some of your mercy, the rachamim. The rabbis say this term constitutes the essence of Moses' claim. It teaches that Moses said before the Holy One, blessed be he, master of the universe, it is chulin, it is sacrilege for you to do something like this. Here's interpreting the word hala, chal is chulin, which is Moses said to God, you can't do this. You can't do this. Can't do it. Here's another interpretation. And another interpretation of the verse, Moses beseeched Vayichal before the Lord. Now that seems to be, we're getting back to the beseeching part, not the nullification or the bringing out into effect or sacrilege. But it says, it was taught in a Baraita, Rabbi Eliezer the Great said, this term teaches that Moses stood in prayer before the Holy One, blessed be he, until he was overcome by achilu. Even the sages were unfamiliar with this term. Therefore, the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of achilu? And Rabbi Elazar, an Amora of Eretz Yisrael, said, right, this is someone who lived in Israel during the later Talmudic period, said that achilu is fire in the bones. However, this expression was familiar in Eretz Yisrael, but it wasn't known in Babylonia, right? So he lived in Babylonia, but he was originally from Israel. They asked in Babylonia, what is the disease that they call fire of the bones? And Abaye said that it is a disease known in Babylonia, so they knew it in Aramaic as Eshta de Garme, which in Aramaic means fire of the bones. In other words, a fever. So it gets back to what we heard before, which is that Moses got sick. He prayed so hard that he got sick. He was going to kill himself. He prayed so hard that he's essentially saying to God, you want to start over with me? I'm not going to be here. I'm going to make myself sick. I'm going to pray so hard that I'm going to make myself sick. So again, tells you a little bit of Aramaic here. I mean, it's all in Aramaic, but they're saying, what is this Hebrew phrase, achilu and eshta de garme? Okay. Now we're going to get back to something that and this is kind of where we're going to be finishing tonight. We heard about this. Moses continues his prayer. He says, remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore in your name. What is this meaning in your name? Rabbi Elazar said, Moses said before the Holy One, blessed be he, master of the universe. Had you sworn to them by the heavens and earth, I would say, just as the heavens and earth will ultimately be no more, so too your oath will be null and void. Now that you swore to them by your great name, just as your name lives and stands for all eternity, so too does your oath live and stand for all eternity. God, the earth might come and go, but you swore on your name to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You made you used your own name. You used a divine, eternal promise. You can't go back on it. You made it on your name. If you had said it, I promise on the mountains and on the heavens, but you didn't. You said it on you, right? So you can't go back on it. Which, by the way, is interesting because we haven't had this before a lot. I want to point out. The Talmud seems to be saying here that the planet is finite. The world that we have around us doesn't last forever. It's not something we've had a lot. And it doesn't say it's going to be obliterated at the end of days when the Messiah comes. It doesn't say that. It does say, though, that there's a finite time for the planet. So it's an interesting idea. You seem to have known that. We know it now because, Science has told us that eventually the sun will expand to a point that the earth will be blown up. I don't remember how many billions of years that is from now. Mike, when is that, by the way? Do you have that in your watch? When the earth?
I think it's going to be 5 years from tomorrow.
5 years from tomorrow. Mike is giving it 5 years. Yeah, who knows?
It depends when Iran gets the bomb.
Okay, John. Okay, John. Now that's the other possibility, is that most people don't think we make it to when the sun makes it impossible to live on this planet, that we'll make it happen before. But yeah, the Talmud seems to take that for granted to some extent. So interestingly, God's for eternal, but the universe that God created might not be, which is interesting. Well, Mike,
Planets that have intelligent life, what kind of religion do they have?
yeah, but based on this, it doesn't matter. God created the universe. I don't know when we get to it, by the way, but we actually read in the Talmud that this is not the first universe that God created. Yeah, this is not the first universe. So that is one that people are like, whoa, where did that come from? Yeah, so the idea that this is not the first universe and it won't be the last universe, that is something that is an interesting idea. And I'll tell you what tractate that's in. Let's see. I'll just tell you where it says. No, that doesn't have the whole doesn't have the text on it. But yeah, this idea that there are numerous universes is of course something. And hold it 1 second. I will tell you that to get to Mike's point, I think I know where it is. Yeah, here. It's not in a tractate that we read. Actually, when we read the Talmud 17 years ago, we actually read this text. Hold on 1 second. I'm going to show it to you. So, because yeah, it will be a while before we get to Avodah Zarah, but it's a great text. We actually read from it because it's got some really good stuff in it. But it's about idolatry technically, but there's a lot of stuff in it. Yeah, there's so much stuff here. 1 second. Here it is. These are all about the destruction of the world. Literally the destruction of the world. No, but that's wrong. 1 second. Here it is. Here it is.
You got 5 billion years, but not 5 years.
I know. I said billions.
I thought it was 5.
5 years. Yeah, it's 5 billion.
Yeah.
That's right.
From
From tomorrow. And if you wish to say, the chariots of God are 20,000. So wait, he rides on his light cherub and flies in 18,000 worlds. As it is stated, the chariots of God are 20,000. Yeah, I mean, basically says right there. Well, this has to do with how many worlds there are, how many other planets there are. Specifically, this gets to Mike's question about how many planets there are. That God is all on all those other planets, by the way, Mike, according to this. So, but as far as how many universes there are, I don't remember if it says how many times the universe is going to be destroyed and then reborn, but they did have that teaching in the Talmud. So, or later on, it may not, that last one may not be in that part of the Talmud that we're reading now. It's in everything now. What are you talking about? The multiverse, you have no idea like how the multiverse has taken over every single Marvel thing now is I know, but I mean the multiverse is everywhere now. I mean, every one of these, and that allows for people to come in and out of stories and for someone to die and be brought back is they're in a different multiverse. They're in a different universe. Yeah. They have this yeah. So all right. So let's go to so let's go to the last part we're finishing with right now, which is again, these are as I promise you, these are the prayers of Moses, which are amazing prayers. Hold it a second, we got to get to it. I shouldn't have left that part, but I love it. I wanted to show you that there are a lot of worlds, Mike, and a lot of universes too. So, all right. Let's get to it. And it is right here where we were. So right here. So you swore in your name, not on the earth, right? And you are eternal. In this verse, Moses continues and he says, and this is from Exodus, and you said to them, I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of the heaven, and all this land of which I have spoken, I will give to your offspring so that they shall inherit forever. The Gemara clarifies a puzzling phrase in the verse. That phrase of which I have spoken, it should have said, of which you have spoken, as Moses is referring to God's promise to the forefathers. Rabbi Elazar said to this point, the verse cites the words of the student, Moses. From this point, and all this land of which I have spoken, this verse cites the words of the master, God. And Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani said, these and those are the words of the student. Moses spoke the entire verse. Rather, Moses said before the Holy One, blessed be he, master of the universe, those matters which you told me to go and say to Israel, in my name, I went and said it in your name. I've already told Israel of God's promise to the forefathers. Now what do I say to them? So I never said, it's me telling you this. It's God telling them. How can I now tell them that you're going back on your word? The Gemara moves to a discussion of additional prayers offered by Moses. So it says, again, God essentially gets not tricked into it, but Moses basically says, how can I go back on your words? And this is the, let me just show you the last part that we are going to finish. We'll just read a couple more paragraphs. So the additional prayers offered by Moses. Moses said that if God fails to bring the Jewish people into Eretz Yisrael, the nations of the world will say, the Lord did not have the ability, Yecholet, to bring this people into the land which he swore to them. He killed them in the desert. We read that before, which is, again, God, you'll look powerless if you can't bring them in. The Gemara examines this verse closely. The verse should not have utilized the term Yecholet. It's an abstract feminine noun, but it rather should have said the Lord was not able, Yachol, which means able. The feminine did not have the ability. I'm saying it's an unusual phrase. Why does it say Yecholet and not Yachol, which it should have said? Rabbi Elazar said, Moses phrased it this way because he said before the Holy One, blessed be he, master of the universe. Now the nations of the world will say that his strength weakened like a female, and he is unable to rescue the nation of Israel. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to Moses, and did the nations of the world not already see the miracles in the mighty acts that I performed on behalf of Israel at the Red Sea? Moses said before, master of the universe, they can still say the Lord can stand up to one king, Pharaoh, but he's unable to stand up to the 31 kings of the land of Canaan. So Moses just said to God, if you don't bring us in and wipe everybody out, they will call you a woman. That's what he just said. Now, again, I'm not saying it's politically correct, but the rabbis they didn't play with the language. The language was there, and it allowed them to say that. So God, you don't have the strength. You're not a strong God. And God said, what are you talking about? Look what I did in Egypt. And Moses cleverly says, yeah, but that was only Pharaoh. Now we have 31 kings to deal with. What are you going to do now? It was too hard for you. You can deal with one king, but you can't deal with 31 kings. So you're not that strong, God. You can see Moses in these discussions is trying everything to argue with God. Well, we know he did, but this makes it even more so. The Talmud, these midrashim are even more, extensive, if you will. Rabbi Yochanan said, from where is it derived that the Holy One, blessed be he, ultimately conceded to Moses, as it is said, and the Lord said, I have forgiven according to your word. The sages of the school of Rabbi Ishmael taught, according to your word, it will be, as indeed in the future the nations of the world will say this. And this is, again, the Gemara concludes, happy is the student whose teacher concedes to him, as the Lord conceded to Moses. Now, we began with a really strange story of Shmuel getting in trouble with Eli for giving a decision in front of him. But here we read a very different angle, which is that teachers, when a teacher says to a student, you're right, think about how happy that student is when that happens, right? And so we say it all the time, Mike. Whenever you make a wonderful insight, we say it's a wonderful insight, Mike. The rabbis are essentially saying here that, yeah, we don't want people to challenge us. We don't want people to come and give a decision in our presence. It's a little audacious, but when we argue when a student argues with us and we concede to them and say, yeah, you're right, that gives them a lot of joy, which is a little different, I guess you could say, than rendering a decision. But it is this idea that our student can get to a point where, right, that where the Jedi, where the Padawan becomes the master. No, this idea of yeah. So there is this feeling of, if we can create students that can defeat us with the arguments, then we've done our job. And they're happy, and we're not, we shouldn't be upset with it. We shouldn't be upset with it. We'll read this last part, which is explaining the verse, nevertheless, as I live, and the glory of the Lord fills the entire world. Rava said that Rav Yitzhak said, this teaches that the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Moses, Moses, you've given me life with your words. I'm happy that on account of your arguments, I will forgive Israel. And that's what the master says, essentially, is, as I live, right? Chai ani. God doesn't literally live because of you, but God says to Moses, I'm so happy the fact that I'm going to save Israel because of what you did. And we really do look at that argument that Moses makes on behalf of us, or the argument that Abraham tries to make on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah, as this audaciousness that Judaism teaches us that we can have with God, which is that our prayers can be audacious. They can be aggressive to some extent, but they are also to some extent filled with an argument, but also with a love of God, a recognition of God's power, but also this kind of understanding that, like, let's say to God, God, you have the power to sustain and destroy the world. For your sake, sustain it. And that's really what we do traditionally a lot on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. When we stand before God on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we're saying to God in those moments with a certain sense of audaciousness, God, you have the power to judge the world for destruction right now. And that's what we're really supposed to do on Rosh Hashanah. When we talk about this day being a day of judgment, a day of God's sovereignty, we're standing before God and literally saying to God, like Moses said, yeah, we know the world is so bad that you should probably destroy it. I know we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing on this planet, but please, God, don't destroy it for your sake, right? For your sake, for the sake of the work we're trying to do to make the world better, give us another chance. And with the promise that this year we're going to do better. With the promise that this year we'll learn from our mistakes and do better. If you give us another chance with ourselves, with our world, that we're not going to do like we did this last year. It's very hard this year to not feel a sense of powerlessness, but at the same time, we recognize that maybe we have to create a situation that we're not going to go back. We're not going to go back to having to be in a precarious situation all the time. Sometimes we make mistakes by, again, not doing what we need to do. And
Rabbi,
yeah.
The fact that God ends up saying, I will forgive Israel, I think that's a lesson for all of us, that we need to learn forgiveness in order for the world and us to be healed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Forgiveness is essential. And this statement is beautiful.
That's another wonderful teaching. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. On a personal level, on a relationship level, you're absolutely right. Thank you for sharing that. I'm thinking on a macro level right now, because I look at the world that we're in right now, and I look, as victims again. I don't want to keep belaboring the point, but at a certain point you say, well, God, how do we make sure that this year is better than last year? Part of it is out of our control, and part of it might require hard decisions that we have to deal with, and we have to watch. And again, some of them are in our power and some of them are not. But I definitely feel on a macro level, it's hard to even think about the personal level right now. But it's a really important point, and it's one that we can't forget, is that in the midst of dealing with big situations for us as the people of Israel, as Jews, as people connected to each other and to what goes on in the land of Israel, everything else in our country, yeah, we can't forget the personal relationships and the forgiveness. Forgiveness. Yeah. But just all of that, all of our personal relationships, we can't go into this year forgetting that. So that's important. Thank you for reminding me and all of us that we have to be working on that. So again, Happy New Year to everybody. It's hard to even say Happy New Year right now, but I don't know. I had a really, like all of you, I had a really bad weekend this last weekend. It was very hard for me to get in any sense, a sense of joy this weekend, which I felt really bad because, it was I had a chance to be with family this weekend, and we had, it just, the shadow of what happened in these last few days has just been enormous. So, it's been hard, and it's been hard for all of us. So, but yeah, we have other stuff we're supposed to do this time of year, not just thinking about the political situation and this devastation that we're dealing with emotionally from Israel. But yeah, we have to do this work right now. So thank you.
Yes. And thank
All
you.
right.
Bye. Thank you so
All
much.
right. Stay well, everybody. And let's make this year go out on a good note. So thank you. Take
Thank
care.
you very much.
All right.
Thanks,
All
Rabbi.
Bye-bye.